Saddam Hussein and his regime will stop at nothing until something stops him.
Powell argued Iraq is deceiving the weapons inspectors.
This was a typical American show, complete with stunts and special effects.
You may or may not be familiar with this historic speech by U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell in 2003. It is one of many examples which highlight the importance of satellite imagery and the way it impacts international affairs. The production, contextualization, and interpretation of these images is a complex procedure involving different actors and interests, which influence the actual picture and the way it's interpreted. However, satellite images continue to be perceived as an objective view from above depicting reality.
This video will deconstruct the making of satellite imagery in order to better understand its use in and impact on IR, especially regarding the image's contextualization and interpretation by certain actors.
Let's first take a quick look at the satellites. They differ in regard to the speed they can travel, the size of the area they can cover, the overall quality, and the type of picture they can produce. With that said, you will see that satellites like the QuickBird and Spot 7 produce different satellite imagery in terms of spatial resolution, color, and coverage capacity.
However, satellites don't simply take those images and send them to a government or an NGO, like a picture taken with a smartphone and sent to a friend. Rather, they take many pictures and collect a great range of data using different filters and sensors. Therefore, the final pictures we see are a result of a complex multi-step procedure in which the data collected by one or more satellites is modified and combined. In the end, these processes highly influence the final image and can erase unpleasant components of images such as clouds, atmospheric reflections, or increase contrast and color. Also, after that process, satellite images often still don't speak for themselves. In order to give them meaning and contextualize them, further data layers can be added. For example, environmental data like locations of wildfires or demographic information on housing. Moreover, the picture's location has to be given, and the objects or events supposedly depicted often need to be addressed and highlighted by arrows and explanations by experts in order to be recognizable for observers.
However, before their publication, states, institutions, and NGOs rely on expertise to secure the meaning of the story drawn from the chosen satellite imagery. This, in combination with descriptions and public statements from experts, allows for a convincing and authentic interpretation of the image.
The depicted production procedures of satellite imagery have demonstrated that they neither constitute a fully realistic and objective view from above, nor speak for themselves, as they highly depend on context and expert interpretation. In order to now illustrate how production, contextualization, and interpretation of satellite images is relevant to the field of international relations, let's come back to some examples. Probably the most prominent one is the satellite image of supposedly weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Presented in the United Nations Security Council by US Foreign Minister Colin Powell, they played a crucial role in legitimizing the US military intervention in Iraq. Powell repeatedly stressed the high accuracy and validity of the satellite material in which arrows point at what is said to be weapons.
Let me say a word about satellite images before I show a couple. The photos that I am about to show you are sometimes hard for the average person to interpret, hard for me. The painstaking work of photo analysis takes experts with years and years of experience. This is one of about 65 such facilities in Iraq. We know that this one has housed chemical munitions. Here you see 15 munitions bunkers in yellow and red outlines. The 4 that are in red squares represent active chemical munitions bunkers.
Despite the claimed accuracy of the image and the expertise of the people interpreting it, it later became clear that it did not constitute evidence for chemical weapons, and in fact, there were no chemical weapons in Iraq at all. In regard to IR, this example illustrates the great impact that satellite imagery can have on world politics. Simultaneously, it illustrates how the use of satellite imagery should always be scrutinized in regard to the expertise and contextualization that accompanies those images, as those are the locus of power in creating the image's broader meaning.
Next to that, satellite imagery not only frames how we represent and see security issues, but also constructs our general view of other countries. More specifically, satellite imagery provides data that can help determine socioeconomic indicators when no other reliable information exists. This was the case during a news briefing at the US Department of Defense in 2002 regarding a nighttime satellite image of the Korean Peninsula. In this event, members of the US Department of Defense used this image to establish a certain narrative in which the weak light intensity of North Korea during the night was interpreted as scarcity, weakness, and suffering, as compared to the bright and thriving South Korea and neighboring countries. With that said, one should keep in mind that the light intensity and the contrast produced in satellite imagery does not appear like this naturally, and may be altered, which in turn may change its context.
Lastly, satellite images are more and more used by NGOs, for example to monitor human rights violations or environmental destruction. In order to illustrate this and to potentially influence state behavior, they offer tools which allow users to add different data layers such as wildfires and deforestation. In this process, it plays a crucial role which data is collected in the first place and implemented in the tool. As research has shown, data relating to local economic or cultural use of certain areas often is not collected and implemented. This can potentially blur local actors in the view from above.
As observers, we often aren't familiar with the technicalities of satellite imagery, and in this way, we don't question the masses of free or licensed image datasets that are often archived rather than analyzed unless there's a reason to suspect it has relevance to current affairs.
So maybe the next time you come across different satellite images, think of the way they are produced, contextualized, and interpreted before accepting or adopting a certain narrative.